Good.
Put them out first.
And then when I tried
They
to
can't.
Good for you.
It's like 8-year-old and the rest are.
no animals.
I was telling about the structures and procedures by creating.
Trying to set
Yeah.
I'm nuts.
See Fiona and
I think I went
I was like
at everything and then.
panic. Don't yeah.
Exactly.
Sure. Yeah. I'm gonna. I'll do a good job.
To actually do when I started.
Without traffic, I leave my house about 2 hours. So you have to.
And there was like you're treating me lunch. You said
She's not in there.
Which one?
How was the event?
Knowing.
That's why I couldn't go evenly. On Friday? Oh no.
Okay.
And your principal just.
Not really, no hyper. Right?
I was trying to but you were amazing last night.
Oh, you were.
Don't hyper up, please. We had
I felt like you were totally like professors, you know what I mean? Trying to go to class.
$1.
I'm sorry.
But I understand.
Thank you for joining me.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Folks, feel free to hopefully, I think hopefully our fourth panelist will be joining us shortly. I think as to be expected, lots of DC 5 p.m. traffic. So welcome. This is our first installment of our speaker series. My name is Kristen Sinclair. For those of you who don't know, I'm a professor in the Advocacy and Policy track here in the Master's of Educational program at Georgetown. Program is a 12-month interdisciplinary residency-based program that brings a social justice and equity-based lens to teaching, learning, advocacy, and policy. And we have 2 concentrations in our program, learning and teaching, which is our joint Master's in Teacher Certification program focused on culturally and linguistically responsive and asset-based teaching, and advocacy and policy, which gives students the conceptual tools and knowledge to transform both the policies and structures of education in order to support vibrant and anti-racist classroom practices. If this sounds interesting to you and you are not currently a student or alumni, our priority scholarship application deadline for our next cohort, summer 2023, is December 15th. Applications are open now, very exciting. And for more information about our program, you can visit our website or follow us on Twitter and Facebook. So now onto our panel. I'm going to introduce our panelists. For a little context, over the last 20 years, Washington, D.C. has experienced Intense gentrification, accompanied by economic growth, increasing housing costs, demographic changes, and the displacement of predominantly Black, low-income, long-term residents of DC. The question of who benefits and who loses from these social, economic, and cultural shifts is the subject of much discussion and debate amongst residents, policymakers, community leaders, and scholars alike. So tonight, we shine a light on how these tensions and debates play out in the context of one of our city's institutions that is most deeply impacted by gentrification, our public schools. I am so grateful to have with us here tonight a panel of folks who bring a wide range of expertise and experiences to our conversation. Our moderator over here, Dr. Emily Gasoi, is an elected representative on the DC State Board of Education. She began her career in education as a classroom teacher in 1995 and has been a passionate teacher of children and adults ever since. Early in her career, Dr. Gasoi worked with MacArthur Award-winning educator Deborah Meyer to found the now internationally recognized Mission Hill School in Boston. After leaving Mission Hill School in 2004, Dr. Gasoi split her time between DC and Philadelphia, earning a doctorate in educational leadership from the University of Pennsylvania. From 2010 to 2015, Dr. Gasoi worked with Center for Inspired Teaching as a course instructor, mentor, and researcher. In 2015, Dr. Gasoi co-founded Artful Education, a consulting practice that works with schools and educational organizations to strengthen practices related to creative teaching and learning. Dr. Gasoi is also the co-author of the book, These Schools Belong to You and Me, Why We Can't Afford to Abandon Our Public Schools, among numerous articles on topics ranging from educating for democracy and teacher-initiated professional development to the importance of safeguarding our system of public education from forces of privatization. We'll go down the line here. Next, we have Jessica Morales. She was born and raised in Washington, D.C. She identifies as a Salvadoreña Washingtonian who proudly leads Bancroft Elementary, a dual language school in the District of Columbia. She has worked at Bancroft for 20 years in a variety of roles and is now in her 4th year as principal. Jessica has always advocated for equity for all students, but more specifically for Black and Brown neurodiverse students. She leads her staff with passion and determination, and she holds everyone to high expectations. Jessica makes sure that any ideas brought to the table by either parents or community members must be accessible to the entire student body. Bancroft is a very socioeconomically diverse school in the heart of Mount Pleasant. 2 weeks ago, Bancroft Elementary received the Building Bridges for Students and Families Standing Ovation Award. Congratulations. This is a great accomplishment for Bancroft and Jessica because family engagement has always been one of their major pillars. While Bancroft families come from very different backgrounds, she has managed to cultivate a very strong and unified community. Lastly, Jessica graduated from the University of Maryland with an elementary education degree and then received both her master's and EDS in bilingual special education from George Washington University. And in the fall of 2023, she will begin her EDD program at Howard. Next, we'd like to welcome Mariana Barros-Titus, who is an independent researcher and community organizer working at the intersection of public history and advocacy in Washington, D.C. Mariana is currently working on 3 projects, including a fellowship with the DC History Center, where she is researching Latinx history in DC and working to bring these community histories into formal memory-keeping spaces in a way that appreciates the multiplicity of Latinx identities. She is also currently working as a project coordinator for the Herbert Denton Biography Project and serving as the project manager for the Black Broad Branch Project, the latter of which is a public history project based on Black-owned land in Chevy Chase, DC. She holds a BA in political science from the University of the District of Columbia, and her work is primarily focused on analyzing and dismantling barriers to systemic literacy for historically underrepresented communities. Mariana is passionate about nuancing the conversation and conceptualization of the Washington metropolitan area to represent its rich and diverse local history. She believes in informing public policy through the sharing of community histories and individual life histories, which can serve as powerful reflections of governance and practice. Next up, we have, making our way down the line, Dr. Alisha Butler, a former Ed Transformation adjunct professor and the inaugural Provost Equity Fellow in the College of Education Studies at Wesleyan University. Her research draws on interdisciplinary perspectives to investigate the overlapping ecologies of schools and neighborhoods that shape students and families' schooling experiences. Her research considers the link between school and neighborhood improvement, the significance of space and place for understanding educational equity, and how school-family community partnerships can strengthen schools. Her doctoral work, which she completed in the College of Education at the University of Maryland, College Park, investigated how gentrification shapes the culture and context of urban schools, with a focus on how middle-class families make decisions about schools and how gentrification shapes the politics of family engagement. Finally, hopefully joining us will be Julia Irving. Oh, Julia is here. Great, wonderful. Come on down. We're like the Price is Right here. Thank you, yay. So glad you could join us. A servant leader with over 25 years in community engagement and advocacy, Julia Irving continues to serve in her hometown of Washington, D.C. With the community relations sector. Previously, Julia served the neighbors of Ward 7 as the community outreach specialist with the Metropolitan Police Department 6th District, where she fostered relationships between officers and neighbors of the ward. Both skills were first developed while serving with East River Clergy Police Community Partnership under Reverend Donald Isaac, where she served as an executive assistant, special projects manager, and director of the Damascus Road Prisoner Reentry Program. Her passion for service began at a young age, assisting her stepfather with outreach for Brooklyn Union Baptist Church, and was further developed by the late Robert Hoderney through Archbishop Carroll Service Project at Zacchaeus Soup Kitchen. Julia is most proud of the accomplishment of serving as a vessel to usher her son shine into this world. Julia serves as the treasurer for the Catherine Watkins Executive PTA Board, as well as an inaugural member of the Kindred Equity Group at Watkins. So thank you. Welcome, everybody. Before I turn it over to the panel, we'll have a little more than an hour or so for panel discussion, and then we'll open it up to audience Q&A. So please save your questions for the end. Folks watching on the live stream, wherever you are, you can chat your questions directly to our program coordinator, Ann Musica. And if you have any technical difficulties, please chat her as well. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Emily and the panel.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sinclair, and it's wonderful to see all your faces and to be here in person, and hello to everybody who's watching on the live stream. I love that we're able to do both these days, and that's something, at least one positive thing maybe, that has come out of the pandemic. I also just want to thank the Education Transformation Program. We have Professor Reed, Dr. Reed here, and Dr. Wesleyan Nero, who are sponsoring this. So thank you. And I am very honored and humbled to be here with these amazing scholars, experts, and folks who are really experts both because they are living this topic that we're going to talk about, and obviously have studied it. In some cases, will bring history to this conversation. So it's going to be a very rich conversation. I did just want to provide some context for sort of the education setting here in DC. It's very specific. DC is very unique in a lot of ways, and perhaps most so in education. So one thing I wanted to first point out is we do have mayoral control, and that in itself is not necessarily unique, but in DC, it's really absolute mayoral control, meaning we do not have a state apparatus, right? And so the mayor really is sort of the last word, and it's a very top-down model of education. And why that matters is because decision-making can happen at different levels, but the mayor can make unilateral decisions and often. So that's important to know, I think, in this context. We have, outside of New Orleans, the largest charter sector. And so half of our schools are charter schools, half of our students are educated in charter schools. One of the reasons that's relevant to this conversation is because charters are semi-autonomous. We do not here in DC regulate how many charters can open. And so that leads to a situation where we don't have as much comprehensive planning as a lot of other districts do. Another thing that happens, therefore, is some wards, for instance, Ward 3, which is the wealthiest wards in the city has 0 charter schools. Ward 1, where Jessica and I, where Jessica's school is and where my home is, where I represent, has 3 charter schools, maybe 4 if you count. And that's talking pre-K 12, because we do have a lot of adult charters, but that's different. And then if you look at a ward like Ward 8, which is predominantly low income, predominantly African American, they have 21 charter schools and 13 DCPS schools. So that's a lot of schools. It's like crowding of schools. And that's important when you're talking about where students are going to go and if there's enough students actually to fill the seats in those schools, right? We have choice, which means that it's intended to offset some of the inequities that come with gentrification, or in any city, the idea is your zip code should not determine the quality of your school. So in DC, one of the main levers to offset that has been choice. But as we see in our schools, unless you're able to create a mechanism like we are setting aside a certain number of seats, I'm going to leave you to talk about that a little bit, then really what we've seen firsthand, and also now there are studies that show that actually in our schools, there's still a lot of inequity and segregation, even with this system of choice. And we can talk a little bit about why that happens. I know that Professor Butler will have some things to say about that. And then finally, I will just say that, I mentioned 3 different wards. I just wanted to note that the ward we're in right now, Ward 2 and 3 are the most, high income wards in the city. Then there's 1, 4, 5, and 6, which are more mixed economically and racially and ethnically. And then Ward 7 and 8 tend to be more low income and often are referred to as east of the river. So to put that out there if it comes up. And of course, aside from 2 and 3, which are already high income, all of our wards are gentrifying to some degree, right? Some more than others. So I'm going to leave it there. And actually, Dr. Sinclair, do I have the questions?
I have the.
Oh yeah, I just assumed I would have
on them too. So.
Oh no. So actually, I did not bring the questions. I just realized. I'm sorry. So I will. How embarrassing. Sorry. So I am going to begin actually with you. Do you mind if we go by first name? Okay. So Alisha, I'm going to start with you. And the question is, please describe how you would define gentrification. And broadly speaking, the knowledge and experiences related to the impact of gentrification on education that you bring to this panel.
Thank you all. I'm excited to be a part of this excellent panel and learn from everyone here. I will be bringing my expertise as a scholar of education policy who specializes in research on schools and neighborhoods. And my dissertation work was really about how gentrification is shaping the culture and context of schools in DC. And so the term gentrification is one that is contested. We started hearing this term in the 1960s when Ruth Glass was observing the transformation of neighborhoods in London, basically by middle-class individuals who purchase homes. I think in addition to thinking about individual middle-class consumption patterns, we have to understand the ways that this is a process that is driven by both public government action and private capital coming together to transform neighborhoods that have been formerly disinvested. Also, when I think of gentrification, there is a lot of debate as to whether displacement is a necessary feature of gentrification. And I think that that debate actually obscures some of the ways that even if residents are able to remain in the neighborhoods, they are still marginalized and excluded in many different ways in terms of perhaps diluting political power, feeling that they don't belong in the neighborhoods, feeling that spaces are no longer for them. So I think of this process as one about economic transformation, in the US, racialized transformation that includes many forms of marginalization and exclusion of longtime residents.
you brought up this question, which I think is a great one of, is displacement necessarily part of the package? And also, if not, is marginalization? I don't know if anyone else on the panel wanted to also weigh in on anything that Alisha said, including those. Yeah, go ahead.
Like where we're sitting right now is Georgetown. And historically, this was an all-Black community. And we were moved out. And we even have a church here, and it's a historical church, but there are no resources going to that. And I give that context because Native Washingtonians, like when I was a kid, we came to Georgetown and we just walked around. But now it's almost as if a Native Washingtonian comes into Georgetown, we're looked down upon. And so all of us are like these really poor paupers. I live in Ward 7, and Ward 7 is home to the highest rate of single female-headed households that make over $100,000. But everybody looks at us, yeah, little known fact, but like a lot of people look at us as though we're less than. And even in my community, when we have new neighbors that move in, and it's not just on racial lines, it's those that aren't from DC, like the allure of DC is what brings people there. But then you come into the community and you strip away every single thing. Oh, they're having a block party. Oh, you're playing this go-go music that I don't want to hear all night. But all of those things are quintessential DC. DC, I like to describe, is a countrified city. We have all of the amenities of a big city, but we really are Southern people. We really just are a close-knit, and when you have new neighbors that move into your communities, not only do they strip away that community aspect where I can knock on my neighbor's door and get dog food because I forgot to get dog food, or where the children can play together, but you also just strip away the core essence that is our community. The block parties that we have that allowed us to be together as a community, that is where we begin to feel marginalized because now we have to have the ANC give us approval for a block party, and they don't want the block party. So now that one thing that was really near and dear to us, and that's where the resentment comes in.
They don't want that block party.
Well, yeah, they don't want that block party. Yes, that's a good qualifier. They don't want our block parties.
Right. Yeah. So, and did anyone else want to jump in on that?
I think it's an interesting kind of what I'm seeing, this pattern of the dynamics of both what you bring up of sort of individualized economic decisions that people are making real-time decisions. And also, as you're saying, the sort of like the cultural, decoupling like cultural standards within a space to fit the needs of new residents. And I think the key to that is to problematize your own positionalities. Like when you're engaging in that space is to really think about what are the historical mechanisms by which the space that I'm navigating in this moment came to be. If you're not doing that wherever you are, then you're already starting from like an incomplete, uninformed standpoint. So like that's the very first step I feel like all of us have to make is whatever space we're walking into, be mindful of like the dynamics that already exist, and also understand that you may not be prioritized in every space and that that's okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Like good instruction for many of us. Did you want to weigh in on that?
No, I was just going to
Okay.
say that, I mean, marginalization or segregation, however, it happens, right? And it's due to gentrification. So that's, unfortunately, like that's the outcome that we witness, at least in our neighborhood, in our school. Sorry, and I do Spanglish, I go back and forth. So, pero es un resultado. It's a result of, right? And so I know you're going to talk about the history and how we keep repeating it. But like, hasta qué punto? Up to what point do we say like, that's it?
Thank you. All right. Second question, let's start with you, Mariana. So to give the audience some historical context, please share a little bit about how the relationship between gentrification and education in DC has evolved over time. And what are some of the tensions and debates around this issue?
I'm going to try to be brief. I'm going to try to be brief, but it's also very, there are a lot of interesting and nuanced dynamics that are happening historically. And so I think the best way for me to do this is to explore this history the same way that I do every single day in my own scholarship, which is by understanding the familial histories of these two families that I've been coming in close contact. And Anne, if you can share, I have a couple of slides for you because I think it's important to root this story and this understanding in the sort of physical landmarks that are still left today. As I was mentioning, so most of my work with Black Broad Branch, as I was mentioned in the introduction, is the Black Broad Branch Project is a public history project rooted in the history of two families, the Pointer-Harris family and the Dorsey-Shorter families. These are two Black families whose stories begin before the founding of the District of Columbia. They lived in an area that today is Chevy Chase, DC, that in the 1840s was known as Dry Meadows, and what was in, rather than the city of Washington, it was in what was known as Washington County. So if we can go to the next slide. This is the difference. This is the map on the left is from 2022. The map on the right is from 1835. And you can understand and see the difference in development that Washington County in the 1800s, what it looked like. You see Georgetown, the sort of grid to the left of the main L'Enfant plan, and then there's the L'Enfant plan. Everything else that was green was known as Washington County, and Washington County was predominantly made up of cash crop farms. A lot of them were large plantation enterprises. Others were small family-owned farms, and many of those small family-owned farms were actually from Black Americans who either were fleeing from enslavement in the South and coming up north and seeking refuge in the District of Columbia, particularly around the Civil War. At the end of the Civil War, you get a population boom in Washington, D.C., and most of it happens in the Washington County area. And you get folks who, for the most part, are coming from agricultural backgrounds, working in plantations throughout the South. And so when they come here, they sort of set up their freed lives oriented towards working the land, tending to the land. And a lot of the economic stability at the time came from selling the crops that you were growing yourself. Can we go to the next slide? That is the story of our Pointer-Harris family and the Dorsey-Shorter families. They were two neighbors living, as I said, what is today Chevy Chase, DC. Pictured here in the middle is Mary Moten in front of her house, which would have been on 5803 Broad Branch Road. And she is in front of the farmhouse. Pictured on the right are Richard and Rosa Brenham Shorter, who had the neighboring farm. These two families landed in Chevy Chase before the 50 years before the founding of Chevy Chase Land Company. And they essentially had the neighborhood of Chevy Chase built around them. As that neighborhood becomes built by predominantly affluent white folks who were fleeing the kind of density of Washington, D.C., those folks start to need a school for their children. And where do they select to build Lafayette Elementary School, which by the way still stands today, on the land of these two families? So part of why I'm here today is to urge those who are, I don't have specific prescriptions of what to do in the classroom, but rather to urge those who are inclined towards policy, creating the systems that are trying to use education towards a vehicle for equity, to understand that these patterns of gentrification, of white flight and Black displacement didn't start in the 90s, in the 80s. It starts in the 19th century, and we have documented records throughout this family and many other families in Washington, D.C., where this happens generationally. And at the end of the day, I can leave you with this, that the landscape of Washington, D.C., its racial demographics, its economic distribution, they're not states of nature. That's not sort of an accident that happens because of the natural way of being. Instead, it's the result of very specific choices In the case of these two families, the combination of the use, you know, it's really interesting to me when you talked about gentrification being the combination of private equity with government actions. You see it in this example. It was the use of eminent domain by the federal government at the time who controlled the District of Columbia land, combined with private equity, sort of the development of this neighborhood and then the political organizing of the neighbors to have the school placed at that location that then led to the displacement of these families, combined with what was then known as racially restrictive covenants. So they weren't allowed, even though they got fair market price, they weren't allowed to buy in the similar area. And so I say this to paint the picture that the ways in which Ward 7, Ward 8 look, Ward 4, Ward 3, they're not by accident. We have a sort of record of why it is that they look that way. And so when we're designing systems that are trying to gain towards equity, we also have to look to the past to learn about what what continues to linger today because of the actions that were taken in the past, and how are we addressing those things as well? And then to your question about like what are some of the tensions in that sphere, is that like we live in a time right now where true American history is being fought for. There are folks who are fighting for critical race theory to not be included in classrooms, even though critical race theory, you know, as a theoretical framework, has allowed us to appreciate so much of the dynamics that are creating our society. You have also spaces like in the classroom where you can't talk about gender politics or sexuality politics, and those fights, you know, it's interesting to me. I had Emily has a group of students who are working with our Black Broad Branch project who are helping us design curriculum based around this history. And one of the students asked me yesterday, she's like, what do you think about the connection of education and politics? Like, should education remain apolitical? And I was like, what do you mean? Like, education is already political. The folks who are trying to fight towards education not being political, what they're actually trying to say is, I'm not interested in the politics that I don't agree with to be discussed in this space. But if we're building nationalism, for example, in the classroom, we're already engaging in politics. You know what I'm saying? So like, let's be true and let's not fake neutrality, because it always comes at the expense of the most marginalized communities.
I think you brought up so many important points. And one of them right at the beginning, I was thinking about the importance of names, right? And part of, now you just ended with like talking about narrative, who controls the narrative? Mm-hmm. And I think that is part of that, like who names the spaces that we're in after whom, right? Mm-hmm. And I also just wanted to, related to that, you know, the importance of telling our stories. I mean, that's part of what's so powerful about all of you, you know, speaking tonight. But I think it is a really good segue, actually, to our next question, which I'm going to throw to you, Julia. And it's really about like what the people on the ground are feeling and experiencing, you know, with gentrification. So how does gentrification impact long-term residents of DC, particularly students and parents? What might be some of the implications of these impacts for education and schools?
Interesting question. So I have this running joke that Prince George's County should pay homage to the District of Columbia. We created their middle class. We allowed them to become the most affluent African American county in the nation, because when Marion Barry, regardless of how people feel about them, but when Marion Barry opened the district government to African Americans, what we saw is those that had means, they left. And when they left, their resources. And so for those that didn't have the means, or for those that were like, I'm DC ride or die, they remained, and our schools suffered. And then you saw communities coming back into the city. And so people were like, oh, these gentrifiers are doing this. But we also saw that we had stronger PTAs. And what does a stronger PTA mean? Like, my son benefits from gentrification. He attends a Capitol Hill cluster school. Our PTA raises about $235,000 a year. to support our school. Yeah, so put that in perspective. His neighborhood school, their PTA dues are $5, a year, and they probably have a strong 20 parents that participate. And so as a result, that school lacks tremendously. And I intentionally, and I feel guilty for it, but I intentionally went in the lottery to make sure that my son could go to a school in a gentrified area because I knew that that meant that he would receive a better education. What that also means is for every time we have a new development and we create affordable housing, affordable dwelling units and IZ units, for those families that don't qualify, because we have this one-to-one match. So in our public housing, our goal in DC is to eradicate public housing. And so we eradicate it and we say, oh, but they could move back. But what people don't realize is in order for them to move back, it means that no one on your lease could have been convicted of a felony. Not the leaseholder, no one on your lease could have been convicted of a felony. So then when you take those families away and you actually find the one family or the couple of families that qualify, they're usually seniors. They've already moved to another place. They're not moving back. And so you just have these seniors, then you have this family that really wants to move back to their community, but they can't because of this covenant. So now they're moving into Prince George's County. And so as they move into Prince George's County, you begin to see the crime in that area go up. You begin to see their schools begin to fledge. But then another thing is you have all of these families that were affluent that moved to Prince George's County, but to keep up with the Joneses comes with a price. And that means that you're working a lot. And so then you're not there for your child. But now your child's in Prince George's County and they feel like I have to compete with those DC people and show them that I'm just as hard and I'm just as thorough. And so what people don't realize is that gentrification, that's how it creates violence. Because now you have these people whose parents had means, but they feel like they have to validate themselves through violence. And then you have those that are sitting there and they're in their grandmother's house and their grandmother has gone on to glory. And their parents don't understand that even though the house is paid for, you still have to pay taxes. And so they're just in this house, and then somebody comes up and says, I'll give you $300,000 for your house, which sounds like a lot of money. As a side note, if any of you all own a house and somebody offers you cash for your house, ask them for double, because that's what they're going to make on your home. But nonetheless, I'm really big on home ownership. But what happens is this entire family unit, they take that $300,000. But they don't have money management, and there's nowhere else in the city that they're going to be able to purchase. So you would think, oh, they're just going to go to Prince George's County. No, they go into our shelter system. And when they go into our shelter system, they're placed in their neighborhood school based upon the shelter. But then when they get permanent supportive housing, that child is uprooted from this support system and placed into a new school. And it sounds ideal, but we pay that rent for an entire year. And then when the family can't make the rent, they're back in the shelter system. So then that's another school that has to start over with this child. And so that's where the impact in our educational system comes, because teachers are having this cycle of kids that are coming in and out, and you finally get them comfortable because you have to develop trust. So you have this child trusting you. You've learned their educational habits. And then they're just stripped away from you, and they have to start all over again. And their next permanent supportive housing won't be where their previous one is. And that's where you see the impact. And you may say, well, what does that have to do with gentrification? Because every time someone buys grandma's house or offers a $300,000, or every time someone buys a new apartment building and they offer them TOPA, like, I'm going to pay out your TOPA rights, and they get really excited about that. Every time that family is displaced, you can bet that that child is going to touch at least 5 schools within a 3-year span.
Thank you so much for that very thorough
Yes.
explanation. I think, destabilization is sort of the word that comes to mind for me in all of this, is like churning and destabilization for just so many, for the families, for the kids, for the schools. Is there anyone else who wanted to build on Julia? All right, well, this is another good segue though for you, Jessica, which is, school leaders in gentrifying communities often have to mediate between the needs and concerns of long-term resident families. Deep breath. And those of families newer to the school community. How do you navigate meeting the needs of different families while ensuring equity? You don't have any experience with this at all.
I mean, the term long-term is what's throwing me off because Mount Pleasant is a very, it's a community where a lot of, it's transient. Like there are new families moving into into Mount Pleasant because of the school or because of, the neighborhood. And those families are affluent, white affluent families. But then I have a lot of families that are Latinos, and they're coming on the buses. And we're getting a lot of those. We haven't received any yet, but I know they're coming. But we have a lot of families that just, are new or recent arrivals to the country. So they stay as long as they're at Bancroft. And some stay and some move out. So the long term is throwing me off. There are a few residents that have been there for a very long time. But how do I deal with gentrification? I've been there for 20 years. I grew up in that neighborhood.
You went to Bancroft?
No, I went to Oyster.
Okay.
I went to Oyster. I went to Oyster. And I mean, I can go on and on. But the way I deal with it is I take a strong stance. I don't sugarcoat. I tell it like it is. Emily says, "Man, you look tough." This is who I am, right? Like this is how I roll. This is how I talk to my staff, and this is how I talk to my parents. If you are enrolling your child at our school, I need you to know the history of it, right? You talk a lot about history. It's not just educating the kids; it's educating the family. There's a lot of history in Mount Pleasant. You mentioned the go-go. So the Mount Pleasant riots back in 1991. It was because white families were moving into Mount Pleasant, and we had, parties in the corner and go-go, salsa, merengue, bachata wasn't around at that time, but we would have like block parties, but that didn't fit into their perspective, or it didn't look right. We were out in the corner drinking, okay, fine, and so. It's educating the families and the residents coming into our neighborhood, like why we are and why we do the things that we do. Now, we have a very strong community, but it hasn't been easy, I will say. I think being transparent with the community and saying this is who we are, this is how we run our school, and what, I no me acuerdo el nombre de la muchacha, Dr. Oh, the one that introduced us.
Oh, Dr. Sinclair. Yeah.
Dr. Sinclair, like what I tell my PTO, and we have a strong PTO, we don't have 200,000 coming on. But what I tell our PTO and anybody that brings an initiative to our school is if it's not accessible to everybody, I'm not signing off on it. You want a chess club? That's great. It's $35 per lesson. Who's paying for Jessica's lesson? If you can't make it accessible to everybody, we're not having it. And I will say, as a Latina leader in the District of Columbia, which is very political, I've gotten over the fact that these stereotypes, like, oh, she's too feisty. Yes, I am feisty. I am Latina, and I am proud to be Latina. And if that's how you want to categorize me, that's fine. But I'm gonna tell it to you like it is. And so I've built relationship with families, and it, again, being transparent, explaining our vision, our mission, and like, we're here to help each other. This is not about you, this is not about me, it's about the kids. I will say it's impacted us, gentrification. We have always had a high population of Latinos, 65%, 70%. It used to be 24% Black and African American. We are now barely 8%. We used to be 8% white and 25% African American. They've been pushed out. I asked myself, this doesn't sit right with me. Why aren't my Black and African American families at our school? And when I asked to do like a census investigation, I'm like, are we not attractive enough? Like, what's going on? No, they're not in our neighborhood. They can't afford it. And the Latino families that we have, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Mount Pleasant or not, they all live at the Woodner. And that's a city in itself. Like, I went there today to do a home visit, and I was like, Jesus, they have like taxes agencies here and everything. Like, but families are coupling, right? Like, it's like two families living in a studio because they can't afford to go anywhere else. So it has impacted us, but I will say, COVID had a silver lining for us. And that's when we brought everybody together. We brought the families with the resources, the families that lacked resources, and when this whole thing about pods started going on, I shut it down. I shut it down. And I was told to listen first instead of saying, no, that's not happening. Because when it was brought to me, it was about, I said, okay, I'm gonna use Carlos as an example.
As always.
We're gonna use this, we're gonna create a pod. And the pod was of families that could pay a teacher, that could pay a nanny, or fly somebody in from Colombia to be their, all power, whatever. And the way it was sold to me was, oh, well, Carlos can come. Carlos can come and his family won't have to pay. Carlos's family doesn't have insurance. So when Carlos's mom has COVID and she ends up going to the hospital or she ends up dying, God forbid, will you run with the funeral expenses? Oh, okay. Do you see the inequities that you are, perpetrating here? Like, I can't stand for it. And just like I'm talking to y'all, that's how I spoke to parents in our PTO. And then I think it's just having a hard reality check. You're coming from a place of privilege or coming from a place of entitlement. I'm privileged, right? Like, and I think it's just reminding parents in a gentle way. I need you to really sit back and think about who's benefiting. I know you have good intentions, but I don't need you to have pity for me. I don't need you to have lástima for my kids. That's not what I'm about. It's having those tough conversations. And I think parents appreciate it. I'm not gonna say I'm everybody's favorite, but they know that I will keep it real. And that's how I carry myself. I also have an open door policy. You can call me, email me at any time. But it goes back to educating the families, educating our kids. I agree, there are some things that we need to include in our curriculum. Live stream, but there are things that we can do as a school to bring the community together. And events such as we do the holiday tree sale. I don't know if you buy your tree there. But what is collected, what is by the PTO and Café Compadres, it's put together and it's made, it's for the kids. And I think also people that, at least I'm only gonna speak to Mount Pleasant because that's what I know. People that move into Mount Pleasant, they move there because it is rich in culture. You're going in there because you want to be a part of it, not because you want to change it. And if you want to change it, you're going to hit a roadblock, and it's going to be called Jessica Morales. I won't tolerate it. Right? I just won't. And I can give another example of how we had to check the community during COVID. I don't know if you were a part of this or not. During COVID, so kindergarten is 80% Spanish instruction. And parents, they were learning virtual, the kids were learning virtual, and I'm getting all these emails and like, you need to change the program in kindergarten. I need to do what? Why do I need to change the program in kindergarten? Because we don't know how to help our kids in Spanish. I can't speak Spanish at home. My kids are having meltdowns. They said they were having mental health issues, and I'm like, I had to call my boss. I had to call my boss's boss. I had to call everybody and their mother. And I'm like, what do? I knew I was not going to change the program. I knew they were concerned and they were anxious because the kids weren't learning and they didn't understand the language. And the first question I asked them, so should I change the English curriculum because my Spanish parents or my Latino parents don't understand English? Do you hear yourself? It's not the language, it's the modality in which kids are learning. That was very, it was hard. Virtual teaching and learning was hard. So we had to have a full-blown meeting. Believe me, I rehearsed so much because as y'all can tell, I am feisty. But I had to have a full-blown meeting with our family. Let them know you chose Bancroft because it is a dual language program, and that's what I am going to give you, right? My kid's coming off the bus right now. I have a kid that I got, has never been in school, 7 years old. We had to go get him from the house. The dad had no idea how to enroll him. Does that mean I changed the English program because the child doesn't speak English? No. So going back to your question, it's transparency, it's educating families, it's sharing that history and holding your ground. I do worry when I'm no longer a principal at Bancroft, who they will place there. And the little control that I have over lottery, very political too, that worries me.
You just say what the.
So the lottery, so pre-K 3 and pre-K 4 is lottery across DCPS. It means parents can apply to different schools that they want to go to or they want their kids to go to. You can live across the street, but you still have to apply through the lottery.
You're not guaranteed.
You're not guaranteed a spot. At Bancroft, what I do is I have a 70-30 model. 70% of the families that are going to make it in that at Bancroft to the wait list, 70% of them have to be Spanish speaking. 30% are English dominant. And remember, my English dominant are not my Black and African American students because I don't have them in the community. So I've gotten a lot of pushback. I want to change it to 80-20. I want to change it to 80-20 because what ends up happening, families that can afford to live right across the street from me, those brownstone, beautiful houses that I cannot afford in my salary, they will have access to the school at kindergarten, right? Because it's a neighborhood school, they will be able to come in. I get a lot of pushback. Oh, but the community is going to get upset. Which community are you talking about, DCPS? Because I can assure you that my Latino families, they're going to be like, great, right? Like, check yourself. Which community are you worried about that's going to create an uproar that's going to affect your election year? Let's check ourselves. So that's how I try to manage how many Spanish dominant kids are at Bancroft. So currently, I just did the numbers. In kindergarten, I have more English dominant students than Spanish dominant. That impacts the program, right? My first and second grade classrooms, I have more English dominant students than Spanish dominant. There are my Spanish dominant kids, there's more in fourth and fifth grade because we're slowly increasing the number of English dominant families at Bancroft, sorry, I don't need to. I talk with my hands a lot. I'm at ELL. So, yes, it impacts. It impacts the program. It impacts neighborhood. And eventually, that I don't know what's going to happen when I'm not there. Who will be placed at Bancroft?
You're going to be there forever, though.
I probably will be because I've been there for 20 years. But just to point out, there are also, like, in the entire district, there are only 2 Latina principals. 2. And then 2 male Latino principals. So a total of 4, which is not a representation of our demographics, right? So I know I said a lot.
You said a lot, and it was a lot of important stuff. And yet, I just want to note that I don't know if we mentioned that Bancroft is a dual language program, which you probably gathered. But I just wanted to put that out there that it is. It's not just that there are Spanish-speaking students there, but it's actually a dual language program. Really important, as just saying, like to keep it. A large percentage of the student body native speaking Spanish speakers, otherwise it won't work.
It won't work, right? And if any one of you want to go into leadership or you want to come follow a principal for a day, please come over. But I will say the one advice I would give any administrator is you have to have your allies, right? When I knew that I was going to stand my ground and I knew that I had to engage the PTO because to be honest, parents will make you or break you. I could be principal today and then not be principal next year, right? But I knew that if I had strong allies that would help me in this work, we would go far, and we have that. Our PTO is very strong. They know, if you take that to Principal Morales, you better make sure that everybody has access to it, because that's the first thing I'm going to have. I'm not doing this alone anymore.
Yeah. And I think, one thing I would say is there's just been a lot of intentionality that I can see even from the outside in how you have created, I mean, you've talked about how you're very open with families when they bring things to you, but you have also set up structures. You mentioned the Cafe Compadres, which is so the PTO, if you don't know, PTOs are generally white parents in schools that have, even if there's only like 2% white families, they will be the PTO presidents. And so that's something that is true also at Bancroft often. But now there's also a Cafe Compadres, which is predominantly Spanish-speaking families, and they are now working together, if I'm not mistaken, so that it is not just, one group whose interests are being. So that's just one example, but I think there's been a lot of intentionality around like creating structures within the school to counter some of the tensions.
Yeah, and PTO is very formal, right? Like
Yeah.
when I first became principal, they were like, we need to have a quorum. I was like, we need to have what? I don't know what a quorum is right now. Like, and then, it was just about getting to know and respecting each other's differences and accepting you for your differences, right? Like in a Latino meeting, you have cafe, you have pan, bread, it's more informal. And so it was now the time. I used to try to bring them together. Now I don't try to bring them together anymore, because like you have a function and you have a function, but somebody's going to be back and forth liaising between the PTO and communicating between the PTO and Café Compadres, and so now we're good. But it is a lot of work.
Something I'm also hearing is reminding me. I think it was you, Mariana, who said we have. For those of us who are the gentrifiers, we have to problematize our position, and I think you help a lot of us too. So thank you. And I'm going to go to the next question, which I'm going to throw to you, Julia, again. So in theory, gentrification can increase racial, social class, and other types of diversity in a school, exposing children to non-homogeneous environments. How might we offer these richly diverse experiences within our schools without displacing long-term resident families in favor of wealthier transplants? And I think you started to touch on this before, but.
I think to Principal Morales' point, at Watkins, again, we're the Capitol Hill cluster, and it's like if you're familiar with DC, it is something to be a Capitol Hill cluster. I did not know that. I literally went there because they had a strong PTA. But our PTA is also the reason why our school no longer has an African-American female principal. We have a white male principal. And some may think that that's a bad thing. But what we did at Watkins, my son has been at Watkins for 2 years, and we have a group called Kindred, and it's an equity group. And so our PTA was pretty much dominated by the white mothers that could have wine at 11 o'clock. Even though I'm
Can't do that.
and I learned that during COVID when they were having their executive meetings, and they would have executive meetings at 11 o'clock, and they're getting on the call with a glass of wine. And the only other 2 Black parents, it was difficult because we had this thing called jobs and we were working. But I share that because what we did, we embraced our principal, and we helped Principal Berkowitz understand the value of Kindred, and then he created a Kindred group for the staff. And so with our PTO, and this goes to the equity of all the money that we fundraise, you would be amazed. Our fundraising money goes towards house tours. And it goes towards this really nice garden so kids can learn about different foods, and that's wonderful. However, there are other ways that we can fundraise, and there are other ways that we can include kids. We have this really expensive aftercare program, but yet the money wasn't going to really help those kids. It was a first come, first serve. That's not equitable. And so when you get the principal involved in Kindred and he begins to see his own biases and he owns them, and then he incorporates it in his interactions with his staff, you begin to see a shift. And I say that the power lies in a principal because I attended Woodrow Wilson Senior High School under the august Wilma Bonner, Dr. Wilma Bonner. And I say that because I attended DCPS during a time where they were putting in metal detectors into every single school. And Dr. Bonner, now when I attended Wilson, it was considered the white school. It was literally like 10% white, but it was considered the white school in DC. And Dr. Bonner said, we're not going to put metal detectors in our school, and we're not going to lock our doors because our students are not animals. But at that same time, we had Coleman McCarthy, and he worked for the Washington Post. And he came in and did a social justice class. And this might be really difficult for some people in here, but I literally would sit across from you and he would say, call Julia every racial slur that you can think of. And then Julia would have to call you every single racial slur that I could think of. And then he said, now let's define those racial slurs. Is that what Julia is? And I loved it because it created a really kumbaya atmosphere at Woodrow Wilson. What it did not prepare me for was the University of Virginia. That was not so kumbaya. Nonetheless, and it warped my mind, like, oh, Black people and white people and Latinos, we all can get along. But I share that because you have to have a principal that's that open-minded, and you have to have parents that entrust that. At Woodrow Wilson, we also had an exchange program where I spent a week, I mean, not the exchange program to Russia, that was a whole different thing. But in international studies, we swapped houses. So again, I'm a native Washingtonian, I'm an African American, and I remember clearly going to one of my classmates' home. She lived in Sursum Corda, and she got to stay in my house. My mother wanted her to stay after the whole thing was over because Julia had never done laundry. Julia had never cooked. My mom did all of that. When I was placed in her home, I was hungry because she cooked and I didn't cook, and that wasn't a racial thing. That was a socioeconomic access thing. That was the first time I heard gunshots, and literally I remember her mom slamming me to the floor like, what the F are you doing? And I'm like, oh my gosh, she cursed at me. And so I am just so appreciative of that experience because it allowed me to see another side of this very city that I grow up in. And that ties into gentrification because so many times people think gentrification, like natives, they think gentrification just means a white person moved to my neighborhood. It really is a class issue, and it's a matter of what you've been exposed to. And so I think that in the academic environment, as you all become leaders, think of ways that you can allow children to truly experience what their classmates experience. One thing that I shared at Watkins is it's great that we do all of these field trips downtown and like we take these little tours of Capitol Hill, but how many times have these kids come east of the river to see all the treasures there? We have the lily ponds over there. They may not like it, but we have the big chair. The big chair is a really big deal. It's really historical. There's so many things like Frederick Douglass House is over there. There are so many amazing things that are east of the river. But no one ever thinks, I'm going to do a field trip east of the river because everyone assumes that you're going to die. You really aren't. You can come over there. You're not going to die. So I just share that because those are things that we have to think about when we're trying to create a school environment that really prepares children for real life. Real life is not you living in your silos. And just because a school is diverse and just because a school leader speaks about diversity, we have the inverse at Watkins. So at Watkins, our school is predominantly white, pre-K3 through 3rd grade. Then at 4th grade, they all leave. And they all leave because they're going to DCI. Because in order to get into that middle school, you have to be there for elementary school. So then we see all of these African American kids come in because they get to come off the wait list because they have to meet their code. But here's the interesting thing. For a long time, Watkins was the boundary school for Potomac Gardens. I literally can look out of Watkins' window and see Potomac Gardens. And yet, parents and their power created the boundary so that literally those children who look out their window cannot even go to the school that's right across the street. And so those are some effects of like gentrification, but it's also when we say that, oh, we're equitable and we really care, pay attention to that. That child now has to walk 4 additional blocks to a school when they could just cross 1 block.
Boundaries. That was something I forgot to mention, actually. My opening with the context, really important, and actually the boundaries are up again for redrawing soon, and it's, you know, I will just say in Mount Pleasant, we have a very interesting boundary that allows to feeder, that allows Mount Pleasant students to go to Deal and Wilson, which is not, if you understand sort of the geography, it makes no sense. And there's a city bus that actually comes and takes them across the park. And I can assure you it was families who fought for that. And we'll see what happens with that. They'll fight for it again, I'm sure. It's a, yeah.
Sometimes there are neighborhoods that are gentrified, but the schools are not, right? So we used to be like that. We used to be like that years ago. They would come in for pre-K3, pre-K4, kinder.
Free daycare, that's all
Yeah,
it
because
is.
it's, you know, in first grade, they were gone. Now, I mean, now families are staying, but I can mention, you know, Mola and Cardozo. Those houses around Cardozo are very expensive. And, you know, the neighborhood is gentrified. And anybody guess how many white students he has? One. And I'm not throwing charter schools under the bus because that's not what I'm here for, you know, but people choose to go to charter schools. Now, if you're paying taxes to live in that neighborhood, you should send your kid to that school. Why not? And yes, we're on the other side of the park, so we feed into Deal and Wilson. And a lot of neighborhood families will put their kids in third or fourth grade or even fifth grade so that they can go to Deal and Wilson, so they can make it over there, right? And mind you, kid has never had Spanish in their life. Fifth grade is 50-50. I'm gonna place my child there because I want my child to go to Deal and then Wilson. So these boundaries play a huge role in continuing to perpetrate segregation, inequalities. You gotta think about it, and we have to have those conversations.
Also, I'd like to add that, like Lafayette Elementary School and the story of Dry Meadows, Deal Middle School has a similar story of being built on what was a predominantly Black community. And Wilson, now Jackson Reed High School, has the same story. So I think it's interesting to think about the dynamics in which, like, why is it that these spaces, which were centering white children at the time, what is the legacy that they're bringing behind? And now they're the most kind of sought after schools in this system that we have. And at the same time, like, the very existence of those schools created inequity. It created familial displacement, community displacement, which, as has been kind of alluded to here, is very impactful into the everyday realities of communities. Black and brown communities have survived because we've been able to network with each other, and it really does take a village. So, like, displacing a community for the building of a school that is centering predominantly affluent kids is creating so many ripple effects that it is even hard to fathom. And yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there, that it's, you know, this is part of a pattern, that these historical patterns have truly created the demographics that we have today, but we're not necessarily, like, appreciating that. We're navigating these spaces as like, this is the way that it's always been, or this is the way that it will always be. When in reality, it took very specific choices that are perpetuated today, either by inaction or continued setting of those patterns in motion.
I could add one thing to this question. We've been focusing a lot on schools and the amazing work that school leaders do and that educators do to interrupt gentrification, but this is not just an education problem. We have to link education policy with other municipal policies, the municipal policies that allow gentrification to happen, that allow for families to be displaced because there is not affordable housing or people block affordable housing. And we need to think about other kinds of positive development that happens where we don't just wait until suddenly there's interest in a neighborhood to improve it. We improve it because there are people who are there who deserve safe spaces, who deserve adequate housing, who deserve all the things that happen to come with gentrification, but they come because wealthy white families are suddenly interested in a neighborhood.
You really cannot extricate housing from education, and there are models out there where, you know, housing can be kept affordable. It exists, and so it really is political will at this point that we have in every major American city, just this trend of unaffordability, and even folks who make a really, you know, like, should be a living wage cannot stay in the cities.
If I may, though, because a lot of times we talk about affordable housing, and, like, I want to keep my job, so I'm gonna do this plug. We do provide affordable housing. The challenge is, what is affordable? So in the District of Columbia, when we're looking at the median income, it's not the median income in the District of Columbia, from all of our surrounding counties. But all of those surrounding counties aren't what our people, their lived experience. And so for those that are in policy, that's something that you really want to push. our affordable housing should be determined based upon the incomes of those that live in the District of Columbia proper, not Prince George's County. God knows not Arlington and Fairfax. The county, I mean, it just really skews it. And so when the district says that they have affordable housing, they really believe that what they're giving is affordable based upon the parameters in which they're able to define.
Thank you for that clarification. All right. I'm hoping, Alisha, that you can give us a little hope. So this next question is for you. Based on your research, how have parents, teachers, school leaders, and community members in DC modeled resistance to gentrification in a way that has successfully served their students and led to more equitable outcomes?
I feel like Jessica is the living embodiment.
Like, tell me the rules, please.
From my work, I wish I could say that I was in schools long enough to see the effects of the great things that school leaders were doing to interrupt inequities. But I think it really came down to having some strong leaders who understood their context, who saw gentrification coming, and who saw what was going on in other neighborhoods in other cities and said, okay, I'm going to get ahead of this. And the story that I think exemplifies this is, one of the principals that I interviewed talked about families coming into the school, and white affluent families coming into the school who saw the school as tabula rasa, blank slate. They had no idea that the school already had a PTA that was active with Black and brown mothers. And they said they wanted to come in and start a PTA. And the principal looks at them and is very diplomatic. And she's just like, welcome to our community. We have a PTA that you are welcome to join. And I think that kind of set the tone for the ways in which the school has been able to stave off some of the inequities that are caused by gentrification, recognizing that there is a community that is already in the school, that is already doing great work, that there are great things happening. Just because it's an urban school doesn't mean that things are broken, that affluent families need to save. And so I think that's where that work starts. I also see parents doing great work. You mentioned, what's going on at Watkins. Kindred has done a lot of great things to sort of help build bridges and help build connections across families. And in building those relationships, you start to work together, make equitable decisions to some degree. I think there's still progress to be made. We need to think about the ways in which families still might not feel comfortable being on a PTA because of the ways that, they're very sort of middle-class organizations that emphasize like quorums and Robert's rules and like you have to do grant applications. And some moms and parents just want to do the bake sale. And that's what they want to contribute. So recognizing, the various assets and gifts that different families bring to schools and not necessarily privileging the fact that some families can raise hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Else want to speak to this question? Thank you.
I mean, not to tout Watkins, but I'm a parent that from pre-K2 all the way up to 3rd grade, my son was in various charter schools. And yet when he landed in a DC public school, that is where socially, emotionally, and academically, my son fell in line. It's like he found his center. So DCPS, it really rocks. And this is why I support Watkins so much, because one thing, and this goes to Principal Morales' point, also is that at Watkins, what Kindred did, we all found that we were kindred spirits. And so within Kindred, those affluent white parents, and I tell this story, I'm a jogger. And so when I had my son, I had my jogging stroller, I heard about moms on the hill, they jog, I went up there. We're jogging, this is what we're doing. And so then the 3rd time I was there.
11 o'clock in the morning.
They had their play dates at 9. But the 3rd time I was there, one of the parents said, I'm sorry, where do you live again? And I was just like, oh, I live down off of East Capitol Street. No big deal, we did the jog. And then when it was over, one of the parents came and said, this is for Capitol Hill parents. Oh, really? I'm just like, all I want to do is jog and have my baby have play dates. But okay, fine. Nobody jogs east of the river. I'll just jog. So fast forward, my son gets to Watkins. We're in Kindred. And I share this story. And one of the moms, she DMs me. And she's like, I remember you from that jogging group. And I wondered what happened. And she was like, I will come east of the river to you. And I will walk your community with you. And that was the start of our friendship. And so then she was the one that said, Julia, you should run for a position on the PTA. And I told her, I have not the time to deal with those things. And she said, no, I will get all of my clique, and we will vote for you, because you have to come up with a slate. It really is like an official thing. They have this entire slate. And what Kindred did, we, through our little squirrel network, we created it so that for the first time in over 15 years, Watkins has a Black woman as the PTA president. And most of us on the PTA, I mean, we're kind of split because you serve a 2-year term, but all of the people that are in their new 2-year term, they're all African Americans. And we started a club specifically for African American dads to go and have happy hour, because we realized that dads don't care about PTA at all. But that also means that there are dads that drop their kids off and they're not able to be connected to the school. And so like they have this place where they do the little guy stuff. But the thing is, it's like it's baby steps because it's not perfect. And we have a lot of challenges, like a lot of challenges on our PTA, but we're getting there. And when you have a supportive administration, but then also you have that backbone of those that look like those that need to be educated on their biases, it helps tremendously.
I just want to jump in and say Kindred is a partner organization. They partner with schools to do what Julia's talking about, bring.
Our PTA pays for it.
That?
Our PTA pays for it, so.
Yeah, so it's not free, but they, once you pay them, however you do that, if the school leader decides to take it out of the budget or the PTO raises the money, they have facilitators who come in and run groups with families, and they make sure that it's a group that represents who's in the school, so that you can talk to each other and understand each other's experience as parents, what your children's experiences are, so you start to understand, like when you say things that are just crazy for other people, you start understanding that from like firsthand. So it's really powerful. And then they've started working with staff too, which is great. And there are other partner organizations that do it differently, but a lot of our schools in Ward 1 actually work with some sort of equity. So it's pretty good. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it all comes back to getting to know one another, right? I mean, giving families an opportunity to ask questions as to why do you do this and why does it work this way? When we did outdoor lunch, that was another topic for us. You know, the families, affluent families that could afford a coat and beanie and gloves and scarves and, you know, all this stuff, they wanted the outdoor lunch at like 32 degrees below. I was like, we don't do 32 degrees. I mean, yeah, I just don't do 32. We don't go up below 60. But you know, it was. I remember like having a conversation, and this we did it through the PTO again. I'm like, well, rain. I said, what are you gonna do when it rains? I'm like, oh, we give you all ponchos. I was like, oh no. El agua de lluvia te hace daño. Like in my culture, we don't go out in the rain because we think we're gonna get sick, whether it's scientifically proven or not. That is my belief. And so I had to talk to parents and say, like, this is how we were raised. We have Vicks Vapor Rub in every corner of our house. Yeah, Vicks. We have Vicks Vapor Rub all over every corner. In any Latino family that you go, you're gonna see Vicks Vapor Rub. It is our cure for everything, okay? Scientifically proven or not. It doesn't mean that we're ignorant, right? This is when I said, like, we have to respect each other's differences. And so we explained to families, like, look, they were like, we'll buy the coats, we'll buy the beanies. It's not about buying it. It's about respecting the fact that this is how their culture is. This is how my culture is. And so we put it out to the community. We said to the community, we'll let the families decide. I'm not gonna be the decision maker. I'm gonna let you guys. And then we did. I said, when the boats come in and they decide what temperature is good enough to be outside or inside, that's what we're rolling with. And they said 45 degrees. I said, okay. But it was a good opportunity to have these conversations among the different, you know, I guess, demographics at our school, because we're not a race. And I think parents appreciated that. Like, oh, I didn't know that about Latino culture. You know, I didn't know that about, you know, so giving parents an opportunity or families and community to have these conversations, somehow find a medium.
Thank you. I just want to ask, Kristen, do we have time for one more question, or should we now open it up to
That last question.
take the last question?
Yeah.
All right, we have one more question for the panel that I'm going to ask, and then we're going to take questions from you all. So you write them down now. All right, so the last question, I'm going to start with you, Mariana, but anyone else who wants to jump in, obviously. Our last question is two parts. Okay, first, what advice would you give our audience, both in their professional roles as aspiring teachers, advocates, and education policymakers, and as adults living and working in DC, about, one, how to mitigate the challenges associated with gentrification and advance educational equity and justice, and two, about how to integrate their roles in the gentrification of DC?
Yeah, I feel like what both of those points kind of come down to is what we've been talking about, problematizing your own positionality, what it is that has, what access to levers of power do you have, et cetera, all of that. But I think at the end of the day, particularly as policymakers, particularly as those who are like setting the patterns by which people are implementing whatever it is that you're working towards, to allow, and you must include, so it's not even allow, like you have to include the opportunity for the feedback loop to be not when you implement, but before you start implementing. So for example, there's a difference between policy in theory and policy in practice. Like we know this. And so understanding, or perhaps like changing the power dynamic from one of, as an institution, we think that this is what's going to happen, and instead turning to the community that you're serving and saying, what is it that you need and how do you need it? And then setting up your work plan, setting the strategies from there. And I think that that can also be implemented, as Jessica was saying, in the sort of interpersonal dynamics as well, of like coming into a space and, not necessarily, regardless of what education you've had access to, regardless of your economic status, not assuming that you know better simply because you've had access to those things, right? Like you don't necessarily know better. And in fact, there are ways in which particular practices just like won't be accessible to certain communities because of the cultural differences, a whole lots of reasons. So I would say that it's like start by questioning, dealing with, and also like not assigning value to your own positionality. Because if you really truly believe in the fact that, for example, someone like George Floyd could not help but be born into the circumstances that he was in and be found in the position that he sort of died in, then you also have to understand that there are other ways in which, like, you can't necessarily help the family that you're born into. You can't help the race that you're born into, but you can help the ways in which you sort of acknowledge that, address that in whatever space that you're in. And so, to not tie, you just have to address white savior complex. And I think I was trying to dance around it, but I don't know why. Like, you have to address your white savior complex and the fact that you may not necessarily know. And then also, like, maybe your educated savior complex, like all of those things to ensure that you are treating people with true reciprocity. Like, that's what it comes down to. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. And then I don't know if, well, you answered both. Is there anyone else who wanted to take on one or both of those? How to mitigate the challenges associated with gentrification and or how to integrate one's role in the gentrification of DC?
All I ask is that you just say hi. And it sounds cheesy, but like when you walk down the street, say hi. And as teachers or administrators, it's great to do home visits, but instead of doing the home visit to look at all the things that the family could improve upon, do a community visit. Just take in not what you see, what you hear, and what you smell out of the marijuana that you may smell occasionally. But honestly, take in the smells and then take in what you see. And walk to the bus stop. From bus stop, catch the bus, go to the metro station. So that when those children come into your school, you understand all that it took for him or her to get to school that day, and then always remember your why. Don't judge them because they had to get on public transportation to get to school. Just know what your why is and be intentional. Learn their well, I call it your workplace love language, so I guess your school-based love language. Be intentional with those children and find their love language and speak it to them on a daily basis. But always keep in the back of your mind everything that they experience just to show up to school. Salute them for it. And when you say hi, literally say hi instead of just like hi. And remember that good morning is a question, it's not a statement.
Great, it's your turn. So I'm calling on folks, okay. So I guess if you have a question, why don't you raise your hand just so I can get a sense of how many folks have questions. Right. Why don't we, I don't know how to do this. I'm gonna start with on this side of the room and then we'll just kind of go back and forth, so.
Hello, I had a question. So obviously, at the beginning, Dr. Gasoi mentioned two factors that play a big part in DC education. That's the semi-autonomous and unregulated nature of charter schools, which is in a large part due to our intense system of mayoral control. And I was wondering how the those two factors, but specifically like how intense DC's mayoral control of education exacerbates the impact of gentrification in our schools.
Oh, am I answering? I was like,
Stay out of the politics.
does anyone want to take that on? I mean,
It makes me think of the ways in which the agendas that mayors put forth feed into education policies. So if you go back, Mariana started us, way back, but going back to Mayor Anthony Williams and his pledge to bring young knowledge workers into cities and redevelop cities, schools were a big part of that. It's changing the landscape of, the school boundaries. It's changing policies gradually to increase the number of charters to attract families who may not feel comfortable going to a school in their neighborhood. So I think that mayoral control, we have to think about the ways in which those agendas now are so tightly connected, in the ways that which mayors may have veto power to say, we're going to increase the number of charters for many different reasons, one of which might be to retain families who we perceive as bringing capital and all the nice things that wealthy families bring to neighborhoods in certain neighborhoods. Do you have anything to add?
I guess I would just say that it goes back to another thing I said at the beginning, which is that there's sort of a resistance to doing comprehensive planning in DC. And that if we had a more intentional plan, we could address some of the negative impacts of what's happening in our city. I mean, I think the gentrification that's not unique to DC. It's happening in all our major cities for the most part. But I think that I know that there are lots of things that legislators and city leaders can do to offset those negative impacts. So I don't see that happening really in our system. And part of it is due to the fact that there's sort of a resistance to planning, to, putting in, allowing more what I would call structured choice, where you allow families to choose, but you put some, give schools the ability to say, we're going to set aside this many seats for low-income students. It happens in a few of our schools, but as Jessica was pointing out, it's not a given by any means, and there's a lot of pushback often on that. So that's just one example. There are other ways. Okay. Good.
So the panel was really good at touching on how gentrification happens sometimes because families are attracted to certain things. It got me thinking about not families, but students. So, you know, DC is home to many fabulous universities like Georgetown. So I'm wondering, looking at universities as businesses rather than places just for curriculum, what the panel thinks the role of public and private universities plays in gentrification. Because, you know, I'm not from DC, I'm from Florida. I came to Georgetown, and hearing you speak just makes me wonder on an individual role, but also as the school as a whole, what role or what obligations do they have in addressing or advocating for their community?
I feel like the one thing it's like if you want to learn how to make money off of housing investment, look at Georgetown, look at Howard, look at GW, right? Like you have these institutions who are making a lot of money off of buying up properties and doing, you know, like providing housing for students, expanding their programs, expanding their sort of acreage, et cetera, for many reasons. And, you know, I think it's incumbent upon the institutions to problematize their own positionality as well. Like, what is it that they're creating and the dynamics that they're setting forth? I think on the other hand, too, it's like wonderful that all of these universities exist and sort of like provide learning opportunities for many people and provide points of interaction with Native Washingtonians, et cetera. But like, how many actual Native Washingtonians are attending institutions like Georgetown and GW? Truly, because at the University of the District of Columbia, we see a lot of Native Washingtonians, but a large part of our population are non-traditional students who, like me, were working full-time and putting ourselves through school. And so the programming at that institution looks very differently, even like in the ways in which classes are provided, what times classes are provided, all of those things. And so, yeah, I think it's important and it's incumbent upon institutions, particularly those who are benefiting off of the dynamics that they're creating, to question how it is that they're including, you know, to your point, like diversity is not enough. And you have to think about the three prongs. You have to think about diversity, but you also have to think about inclusion. Who is making decisions and who has access to make the decisions that are influencing the way in which we're shaping our programming? And also, who is being centered in that programming? When you're shaping those programs, who are you centering?
Anyone else want to? Right, in the back.
I have a question.
Nice and loud.
I don't know if you can hear me, and I apologize for my long question, but I guess like just a little bit of background on me. So I'm a second year public policy student, and I was a teacher for 7 years. So of course, like ed policy is close to my heart. And right now I serve as the co-director for the McCourt Policy Innovation Lab. And so part of the work that we do is that we partner with DC community and government partners to work on all sorts of issues such as housing, food security, environmental justice. And really what we're trying to do is promote social justice, equity, anti-racism, especially in Ward 7 and 8. And so my question is, what ed policy projects are in place or are in motion that address the issues that come with gentrification in the school system?
Can you repeat just the question part again?
Of course. So what ed policy projects are in motion that address the issues with gentrification in the school system?
That is a good question.
I can't speak to policy. I can speak to initiatives, right? Like at least at the DCPS level, they're really considering like seeing the whole child and being an anti-racist district. But in order to do that, you got to think about, like you got to check yourself, right? Because some of the things that you're allowing is just promoting it. So walking into my classroom or into my school with a checklist to see if I'm in compliance isn't enough. So it's the resources, it's the PD. The thought is there, right? That's the theory. Practice is different. So I can't speak to the policy. I'm not at that level. That's above my pay grade, and I should know it. But I know that the heart is there, the will is there, but there's still a lot to be undone. You know, I can only speak from a dual language perspective. There are what, like 8 or 9, 10 dual language schools in the entire district. We're the afterthought. What are my math books in Spanish? Why is the platform designed from a monolingual perspective? What data are we collecting? Oh, so Spanish data doesn't matter? Like, there's so much behind it. It's so grounded. You just got to pull it up from the roots. The intent is there.
There's like a distance between like the intention and the reality.
And who's doing that work? Right? And what is principal's discretion and what is not? I don't know if y'all know about policy.
Yeah, I can't name any policies locally. I know sort of across the nation where people are grappling with questions of gentrification. There are sort of more grassroots parents organizing to push policies in their local context to ensure that families aren't displaced, to promote the idea that, you know, maybe we can use this kind of development to create diverse urban schools, perhaps. I know that, you know, sort of at the end of the Obama administration, there was a hope that housing and urban development and education would be working tightly together. Of course, you have changes in administration, and so things sort of get pushed to the side. But I think that those conversations are going to start. The question is whether or not these federal agencies are going to take up those calls to think about positive development, to think about development without displacement as linked to education policy. That remains to be seen.
In the district, they just appointed the first chief equity officer for race and inclusion. And so Dr. Hewitt has been tasked with going to every agency to see what those challenges are, but also seeing where there's an intersection or there needs to be an intersection of work. So again, she's been in her position for, I think, about 12 months. But I mean, the great thing is she's touched a lot of agencies and she has highlighted a lot of things that the government can improve upon. And I think you're going to see governments moving from working in silos to being more collaborative as it relates to that. And so one great thing would be to see what her work is, or what her findings are rather, around housing and education through an equity and inclusion.
Yeah.
amber.hewitt@dc.gov if anybody wants to follow up with her. Accountability.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. That's a really important step. And I would just say that this is another place where the pandemic sort of opened up opportunity, or I don't know if it's opportunity so much as, you know, the inequities that were there were brought more to the fore, right? And so it was harder to ignore them. I think, you know, some initiatives that this may be not entirely on point, but like the digital equity gap was so huge. And I think that the pandemic laid that bare. And so that's something that has become a lot better in DC. And there's been a lot of attention on making sure that folks have access, not just because they have to get on Zoom or Teams, but now because, you know, we're in the 21st century, everybody needs to have access, right? But in terms of policy, it's a great question because honestly, I don't think there's been a lot of intentionality, I will say, on that specifically, right? And there should be, you know, and I do think it goes back to the planning. If you're not really doing comprehensive planning, it's hard to, you know, address something like gentrification. Right, I'm gonna come back over to you. Go ahead.
So my question sort of relates to what a couple people talked about the need that some school administrations feel to gear towards like the more gentrifying families because it brings in like money and resources for programs. So my question is, what are some of the ways that funding could be changed so administrators didn't feel the need or the desire to be catering to those families? Buying funding to like standardized testing and like that's not as equity focused.
I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you as well. Just repeat the question.
I guess the question is, what are some of the ways that like school funding could be changed with schools, like administrators at like the school level or the district level didn't feel like they needed to clear school board, gentrifying families that were going to be giving them monetary resources through the PCA.
I think one of the challenges is, regardless if you have an affluent PTA or not, it really starts with the LSAT. Is that what they're called?
LSAT.
Yeah.
The LSAT, because that is a parent-led school.
Local school advisory team.
Yeah, so they all work together. And so the thing is, if you are in a community that has a lot of, I like to call them our new neighbors. If you're in a community with a lot of new neighbors and they're on that LSAT, principal needs to demonstrate that they are working with the LSAT. And if they're not working with the LSAT, that parent, our new neighbors, not only are they on the LSAT, they have influence with the AAC, they have influence with the council member. So if that little birdie goes and tells them this administrator isn't working with me, that's where those challenges comes in. The PTA or the PTOs are just that other supportive body. So you have your LSAT and you have your PTO, and it's like just this mafia that's going after your administrators. But it's not, I don't know that it's always just the money that your PTO brings in. It's whoever's on that LSAT, because that principal must work with him or her.
I think what your question is getting at, so gentrification, like in some ways, is like the double-edged sword, right? Like you have new families coming in who have capacity to raise lots of money. By virtue of being here, being in those schools, those families now put schools' Title I funding in jeopardy. And that's where schools start to have to balance the tension between like filling those gaps caused by the fact that their demographics change just enough to lose Title I funding, but they still have to serve the students that they were getting the Title I funding for. So I think, that's probably one area. I think, at the federal level, think about what are the reforms that we can do to EACA Title I to make sure that like schools are actually getting what they need. And when you have demographic changes, that we're able to compensate a little bit. So that's more at the federal level. I mean, at the local level, mayors have like school boards, think about the ways that schools are funded, right? And like, what are the reforms that we can do sort of locally to make sure that funds are distributed evenly?
Council had like I think it was like a hearing or like a roundtable yesterday where people could kind of testify on changes to the school budgeting process. Kind of like thinking about that might be done a little bit more accurately.
Yeah, I think that there's, you haven't listened to Nice White Parents. It's a podcast, you should listen to it. And I think what it gets at is where the rubber hits the road is about the unawareness. Like this is what came up really early on. I think it was one of the first things Mariana said is the lack of awareness of your, privilege when you're coming into a space and you are making demands that seem completely reasonable and you're not aware of the fact that there are a lot of, it causes a lot of issues or that it's insensitive, blah, blah, blah. I mean, so it's not necessarily about the money. It's about a school leader who is able to resist that, these are powerful people who don't acknowledge their power. And so I don't know if money could solve that problem, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, we're given a budget, and yeah, PTO funding, there are some schools that don't have any funding from the PTO, mind you, right? Like, that's a separate issue. But I will say, we're given a bucket of money based on all these different formulas. We're at risk for Title I right now, losing that money. But money that is raised by the PTO, this is where it becomes, yes, it's a blessing and a curse, right? Where like you have families that can raise this money, but then they want to tell you what to do with that money. I'm like, until you sit in my chair and you walk in my shoes and you see the needs of my family, I hear you and I respect you. But here's what we need to do with that money, right? And I think, again, it's going back to sharing your vision, having people on board. I work closely with my LSAT, and they're the advisory team. Doesn't mean you got to do what they're telling you to do. They can say, I don't agree with you all, but this is what I have to do. I'll give you an example. We're at 720 students right now. I needed to open another third grade classroom. And there was some pushback. I was like, I need this. It's in the best interest of the kids. We could do outdoor learning. We could do all this. Right now, I need this. And it took some delicate, talking and having these conversations. But it goes back to transparency, communication, making sure we're all working towards the same goal. And my only, como se dice, thing I would say about how the money is distributed to different schools, it's based on the students are tied to the money. The at-risk category doesn't do me any good because I have a lot of undocumented families that don't, either they qualify for it, but they refuse to go and ask for support because then that puts their trajectory to getting a green card in jeopardy. So there has to be a different way to approach this. But I don't feel like my hands are tied. I do work well with the PTO and the LSAT, but I know that there are some school principals that the PTO is telling them what they have to do.
Might be wrong on this, but one thing from a policy standpoint, DC has this big count thing in November. And so what happens is that charter schools will keep that child. I mean, that
Until
child can
October
be ripping
5th.
out your windows and flattening your teacher's tires. And they will exhaust every resource to help that child. And come October 7th, after that child's been counted, they kick them out. And they go into that public school. But the thing is, that public school doesn't get the dollars for them. And you see that so many, DCPS isn't going, well, they kind of do bus ads, but not on the level that charter schools do. And that's an inequity. The fact that you have that much money to run advertisements for a child to come to your school, for you to keep them under 90 days, that's a major issue. So
That's a really important point. I didn't think of that, but
that's one of my pet peeves.
the charter sector has they are nonprofits, and so they can raise money, whereas I don't think you guys, the PTO can, but you can't, yeah.
I was gonna say also, I wonder if we asked how many charter schools are receiving the students that are coming on the buses. How many of them are they receiving, right? They're going to public schools. They're not going to charter schools, yet they receive federal funding. So if we can take them, y'all can take them and keep them, right? Because you can't, after a certain time, say, oh, you know what, I'm sorry, we can't service your child over here anymore. We don't have any ELL teachers or special ed teachers or whatever the case may be. But hold us to the same standard.
We have time for a couple more. Are there some in the chat?
The live stream, yeah.
Okay.
I'm just going to read this exactly as it is. What should be the positionality of native black or brown during the processes of gentrification? I'm a native, the person has bought a home in Ward 8, but struggle with knowing how or if I'm contributing.
I know that I'm considered a gentrifier in my neighborhood, even though I'm a native Washingtonian, but I didn't grow up on the north-south side of the city, and it's something that I actually struggle with myself, but I do my best to, I'm old-fashioned, so when I moved in, when my sunshine and I moved in, we had a little postcard, and I was because I'm culinarily challenged, so I'm not going with pies because they would hate me, but I just had my little postcard, and I was just introducing myself. I would attend the community meetings. I didn't speak. I kind of just wanted to know who's attending the meetings, who are the pillars of the community. I'm very fortunate that my neighbor actually built the house that I live in, and so they were able to kind of integrate me into the whole network. That meant going to bingo and with the seniors and hanging out with the Silver Strands. But what it did, it helped me to learn to appreciate the community and just really honor that space. And then as I learned about the history of the community, because I am a little younger, the next closest person to my age is 70, so I think I'm kind of young compared to them, but it's I have the energy to go out and advocate for all of the things that they wanted. And then for our neighbors, because I don't live that far from Lincoln Heights as well, which is a public housing, development. And so it's also going into Lincoln Heights and going into Richardson dwellings. I call them by their crew names, but going into Clay Terrace and talking to them and figuring out like, what is it that you guys need to feel a part of this community? Did you know you're part of our civic association? And so when you start to have those real conversations, they'll begin to see that you're not this, I mean, yeah, you made their property values go up, so their taxes went up, but they see that you're really vested in the community and you're going to be there, and you're not looking at it from an investment standpoint. A financial investment. You're looking at it as a human investment that you're making. And again, it sounds cheesy, but I literally say hi to every single one of my neighbors. I don't own a dog. I don't want a dog, but if y'all want a dog park, hey, I'm going to advocate for the dog park as long as Mom and Dad Collins and as long as Miss Williams are okay with a dog park coming into this community, because dog parks are kind of synonymous with gentrification. So those are some ways that you can kind of take the guilt off, just respect, learn, and then play your role to advocate accordingly.
One more? Oh, lucky. Okay, we have one more. Go ahead, take it if you.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't.
You good, go ahead.
I just had, hi, I'm thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate your time and all that I've learned in this space. I had two really quick questions. One, specifically, you guys had been saying PTO and PTA, and I was wondering if you would be able, is there a difference in that? That just,
So PTA is a national organization. PTOs are functionally the same way, but they don't pay the national dues.
Perfect, thank you. And then my second question, you had, it had been mentioned about the chief equity officer. And my question is, with mayoral control and with her being an appointee of our mayor, what does that look like in terms of the actual accountability that can be had with using the results that she is bringing forth? Is there the likelihood that that will just be taken into account, or is that Mayor Bowser's wheelhouse to do what she wants with that information?
It's twofold. I mean, it is information. So any mayoral appointee that has a budget, they also report to a council member. And so that's where the balance comes in. So any findings or any reports that Dr. Hewitt would come out with, it would go to the respective council member that she would have a performance hearing before. This is also to note the council has their own equity person, which is very interesting. But then Mayor Bowser, I mean, she was very intentional in creating this position. This is the first time that this position has existed in the district government. So I believe the intentionality behind it is that she recognizes, just through surveys of staff, because there has been some attrition in the district government and trying to figure out like, what is this about? And so I believe that this is information that she will really take to heart to see some improvements. And even in some of our granting along our environmental sphere, even though Dr. Hewitt's been there a short period of time, we have seen some shifts in the granting in the environmental sphere. It's hopeful.
Hey, thank you all so much for coming out on a Friday night and for listening and for asking questions. And that is the end of our panel, but thank you so much.
For your facilitation, and please keep your eye out. We do these about once a month, and so we will have, obviously with different speakers, but please keep your eye out. Have a great weekend. Two other things. One, there's a RSVP list floating around somewhere. Please check off your name or add it if it's not on there. We love to get an idea of who all is coming to our events. And then transformation students, meet me outside.
Please participate in Art Out All Night.
Yes, again. One night.
Okay.